This is just stock plugins. We're not using anything fancy.
I'm such a mess, diving so deep into nowhere. I'm so breathless.
One of the things that people tell me they struggle with the most is getting their vocals to actually sit in the mix and sound good. And more often than not, the reason your vocals are not sounding right isn't because you don't have the right gear or the right plugins. It's probably because you're overcomplicating your vocal processing. Now, I've mixed thousands of vocals over the years, and what I've learned is that vocal mixing has much less to do with plugins or gear than it does with understanding the principles behind building a repeatable vocal chain that you can use every time you mix. In a video a few weeks ago, I shared the vocal chain that I use on pretty much every single mix that I do, as well as a few plugin recommendations. But today we're going to rebuild that vocal chain from scratch using nothing but stock plugins to prove that it's about the principles behind the vocal chain that make this work, not the gear or the plugins that you do or don't have. So we have a track here called Fugitive by Half Lives, and this is a song that I mixed and did some additional production on. I'll play you a bit of the raw, unprocessed lead vocal, and then we'll talk about how we're going to approach it and why we're going to make the decisions that we make.
What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late? Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back home. I'm such a mess, diving so deep into nowhere. I'm so breathless.
So as you can hear, the vocal is reasonably dynamic, but it's nothing that can't be controlled with some simple compression and just some basic stock plugins. The thing before we begin is to identify the qualities that we like in the vocal that we want to accentuate, and then set a vision for how we're going to do that. So for me, I love the breathiness of her voice, and I want to bring that out even more. There's a bit of vocal fry and crackle to her voice, which I think really adds to the emotion of the vocal, and it makes it feel very delicate. There's also a whisperiness to it, and the lyric says, "What if after all this time I was wrong?" And my interpretation of this is that she's talking to herself. So I want it to have this very quiet, intimate and personal feeling to the vocal. So how do we do that? Well, for me, that means accentuating the brightness of the vocal to bring the breathiness out. And it means using tight, dialed in compression, which is going to keep the vocal fixed and in your ear. But we also got to make sure that we're not over compressing it too much. But before we do all of that, the very first thing is to make sure that we correct any issues that are going on in the vocal. So let's take a listen to it. We'll bring up an EQ as well, and we'll just see if there's any problem areas that we need to work on before we start adding all of the good stuff to the vocal.
What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late? Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back home. I'm so. What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade. What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late?
So there are a few artifacts in this vocal, and I actually want to address this because this is something that's come up in the comment section of a few videos recently where people have started saying things like, can't you hear all the artifacts that are in the vocal? You need to deal with all the problems that are in the vocal. More often than not, when you get a vocal sent to you to mix, there's going to be artifacts in it. And it's just the nature of recording, particularly nowadays where people are recording at home. They're not recording in perfect spaces. Often it's in bedrooms and things like that. There's going to be a ton of stuff that's not technically perfect about the vocal, and that's fine because that's just the nature of it. This vocal's got some click track spill. There's quite a lot of room noise, and we can deal with some of that room noise. We can edit the click track spill a little bit, but there's only so much we can do. The main thing is making sure that we accentuate what we like about the vocal performance. We try and deal with the issues as much as we can, but we accept that there's always going to be artifacts. And even in some of the greatest records that have ever been made, there's artifacts in vocals, and that's just the nature of mixing. We just got to live with it. We got to work around it. We got to still make sure that the emotion of the vocal comes across, because that's what matters the most. So we're taking out this low end rumble, which is down here. We're also removing this room tone, which is really resonant around about 330 hertz, and then dipping out again around about 300 hertz, just a little bit of extra resonance that I don't want to be in there, but I don't want to cut that too much or else it's going to sound thin. So let's just see what a difference this has made.
What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late?
Cool, that's got rid of most of the resonance. I think that's sounding good. There's still a little bit of room tone and resonance in there, but I don't think we're ever going to get rid of that. And by the time we build this vocal chain and we add some reverbs to it later on, you're not going to hear that anyway. It's just part of the character of the vocal. So I'm happy with how that's sounding. So we've dealt with the resonance issues that are in the vocal. The next thing is to deal with some of the dynamic inconsistency that's happening. And the first thing that I like to do to control this is to insert an instance of compression that's pretty fast, usually an 1176 style compressor. So we're going to go with the Studio FET, and we want to set it up so that it's quick enough to catch these peaks and bring more consistency to it, but not so fast that it's squashing some of that vocal fry and that character. I want to let that through and keep that up front so that we really hear the character of our vocal, and that's going to help accentuate the emotion of the performance.
What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late? What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late? Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back home. I'm such a mess, diving so deep into nowhere. I'm so breathless.
Cool, I think that sounds good. And compression is always about your personal taste. Some people like vocals that are very upfront and super compressed. Some people prefer vocals that are less compressed and more dynamic. My personal taste is to have vocals that are upfront, particularly in a track like this where it's quite intimate and quite quiet, I would say. I want that vocal to feel upfront, so I'm happy for the compression to be pushed harder in this mix than perhaps something that would be more natural sounding. So often what happens after this first stage of compression is you hear the artifacts and some of the gross stuff in the vocal even more, because it's kind of put under a microscope by the compressor, which is bringing up that noise floor, bringing up the things in the background that shouldn't necessarily be there. Often this is things like sibilance, so vocals tend to become quite essy after the first compressor. In this case, I think we're hearing some more of that room tone again because the compressor has sort of brought that up in the mix. I'm just going to insert another instance of a channel EQ after the compressor, and I'm just going to take out a bit more of this kind of 300 to 500 hertz area, but I'm going to do it with a much wider bandwidth, and that's just going to help remove some of that in a more natural way. So we're not going in with super surgical EQ, we're just kind of turning it down a bit.
What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late?
I know there's going to be loads of people now going like, why don't you just use isotope, room remover, waves, D-room plugin? Yeah, there are loads of plugins that you can use to remove the sound of room noise, room tone, and room reverb, and all those kind of things. And they are really great plugins, but you don't always need them. Sometimes it's just as simple as dialing out a bit of EQ, and we can do this all with stock plugins. We don't need a bunch of fancy stuff. The point is, we're hearing something that's wrong with the vocal and we're using the tools that we have at our disposal. In this case, it's just a bit of resonance. We can dial it out with the EQ. We haven't got to edit it. We haven't got to do anything crazy. Literally just turn down a bit of room resonance, and I'm happy that the vocal sounds natural. And the other point here is, people often get really hung up on like the order of plugins and the way that things should happen. Like, should you put this EQ here? Should you do de-essing here, compression here, like what's the right answer? The truth is there isn't a right or wrong answer. The way that I approach it is if I hear that something's wrong in the moment, then I just add a plugin to fix that problem. I don't really think about should this happen before that? Is there a right or wrong? Particularly in terms of compression and EQ, like it really is just about reacting to what you're hearing. There are certain things that require plugin orders to be done in a certain way in order to achieve certain sounds, but generally speaking, don't sweat it. Like just react to what you're hearing and don't think about it too much. Now, the next thing to do is start to accentuate some of the stuff we were talking about at the beginning and really bring out the qualities in the emotion of her vocal. So what I want to do is add some more compression to this now to bring the vocal forward and to get it to sit above the mix in a way that sounds very intimate. And in order to do this, we're going to use an instance of the vintage Opto LA2A style compressor. As I said in the previous video where I was talking about the vocal chain I use all the time, 1176 into LA2A style compression is tried and tested. It always sounds really good, really thick, and it gives you kind of all the controls that you need to be able to refine the vocal and where it sits in the mix. And you can create such a wide range of tones just with these two compressors in series. So I'm going to set a ratio of about 3:1. I'm not looking for this to be super fast, grabby compression. What I want is something which is quite smooth and transparent, something which is going to give the vocal a bit of extra thickness. So let's just go for it. We're just going to push it quite hard, see where it goes, and we can dial everything into taste as we go.
What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late? Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back home. I'm such a mess, diving so deep into so breathless. I'm astray, so lost in the night. Miles up. What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late? Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back home. I'm such a mess, diving so deep into nowhere. I'm so breathless.
You'll notice that I'm pushing the release quite slow. And the reason for that is because if you use an LA2A style compressor, you'll notice that the gain reduction meter, the VU meter, tends to move quite slowly and smoothly on an LA2A, almost as if it's kind of in time with the music. And that's what makes the compression sound so natural, is that it has this very sort of flowing, smooth sound to the compression. It's not grabby, it's not fast. And that's what's such a sought after thing with the LA2A compression. So I'm trying to get the needle on this, like doing it visually, but also listening and making sure that you're using your ears, but getting it so that the needle kind of moves and feels like it's moving in time with what the vocal's doing. So as the vocal decays, the compression smoothly rounds off. It's not just stopping immediately. We're trying to get this very smooth, silky compression sound. Okay, so now we're also starting to bring out some of that sibilance we were talking about earlier. And we're just going to deal with this with the de-esser. I don't really think too much about where the de-esser goes in the chain. If I'm hearing sibilance, I put a de-esser in. It's really that simple. I'm hearing some sibilance, I'm going to put a de-esser in. I don't want to overthink it. It's literally just a de-esser. Going to set it to around about 7K, use the high shelf and see what it sounds like.
What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late? Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back home.
Cool, it sounds good. It's a de-esser, it's fine. What I would say is there's just something I've noticed here. As she says this line, trying to find a way back home, I'm noticing that the compressor's not quite reacting fast enough. Feels like something's not set right in terms of the attack and release times. I'm maybe just going to shorten the release time of this opto compression.
Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way. Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back home. Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back home. I'm such a mess.
And let's just check the rest of that vocal.
What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late? Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back home.
So just to explain what I was doing there, I was hearing that line over here was just not sounding right. It felt like the compressor was not reacting in the way that I wanted it to. So in order to combat that, the answer is often to speed up the attack and the release time so that the compressor reacts faster. The problem with that is that there's a trade-off, and when you start using faster attack and release times, you get the sense that the vocal is then becoming squashed and it's becoming over compressed. So the first thing that I did there was back off the threshold to see if we could still retain that upfront quality to the vocal without pushing it too hard. But I was feeling like when I reduced the threshold and reduced the amount of compression, we were maybe losing some of that feeling that was coming from the compression, and it wasn't feeling as thick and as upfront. So I went back, pushed it even harder with the threshold, but then just dialed the mix back. So we're introducing some parallel compression and bringing in some of the dry signal again. And that's just going to help balance out that vocal sound so that it doesn't sound overly squashed, but you still get the nice kind of rich upfront quality to it without squashing the life out of it, because we've gone faster with the attack and release. So really it's all about ensuring that you have that vision in mind from the beginning, and that you're mixing with that top of mind all the time, and that you're constantly reacting to the decisions that you make. The other important thing to mention here is we're doing this all with the vocal in the mix. We're not listening to the vocal in solo. I listened in solo in the beginning to identify where those resonance issues were, but from then we're constantly working with the vocal in the mix so that we've got a reference point and that we're making sure all the decisions are made with the entire mix in mind. So I think we've got a really strong sounding vocal now, and the core processing is pretty much there. But what I always like to do at the end of this chain is add a bit of saturation and give it a bit of character and a bit of thickness to the vocal, which is going to help sit it forward in the mix, going to help it give that sort of warm intimacy. And generally I like to use a tape saturation plugin of some sort. In this case, in Logic, I like to use Fat FX. Now, I've posted videos about Fat FX before and how much I love this plugin. I love it so much that I created my own pack of presets for this plugin because I think it's so cool and so great in terms of how it sounds, particularly the distortion models. So we're going to focus on these distortion models. I'm going to go with this dirt setting because this is kind of like a tape saturation style to me. And this saturation, this soft saturation control, between these two, we can emulate some tape style saturation and it gives a really nice rich sound. We do also have the Chroma Glow plugin in Logic, which has the magnetic setting. That sounds pretty good, but I personally just prefer Fat FX. I think it sounds better for this kind of thing, but it really doesn't matter whether it's a stock plugin, a free plugin, or a plugin that you spend money on. Any kind of tape saturation style plugin here is really good for just giving a bit of thickness and extra character to that vocal.
What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late? Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back home. I'm such a mess, diving so deep into nowhere. I'm so breathless.
Yeah, nice. It's quite subtle, but it's just giving the vocal a bit more thickness, and it just gives the vocal a nice roundness and fullness that really completes it and helps it sit forward. Okay, so the last thing that I typically do in this chain is a trick that I shared in the video the other week. And in that video, I said that this is kind of like my signature move. I pretty much always do this because it sounds great and it gives the vocal a brightness and an airiness and a breathiness that's easily controllable. It's easy to blend in and get it in the sweet spot. And as I said at the top of this video, I really want to accentuate that breathiness and the airy quality of her vocal. So what we're going to do is set up a bus. The buses are kind of crazy in this mix, but let's just send it to bus 25. We're going to set it to a pre-fade ascend because I don't want the level of this track to affect what's going in to this bus. So we're going to set it to a pre-fade ascend, and then we're going to just solo this bus. And what you're going to hear on this is going to sound disgusting to begin with, but when we blend it in, that's when the magic starts to happen. We're going to call this bus Bright Vox, and then we're going to insert an instance of the Tube EQ, which is a Pultec style EQ, and this is really great for doing this trick. You can use pretty much any EQ. I find that like a typical channel EQ isn't as effective for this particular trick, but any EQ will work. I tend to, like I say, I tend to like a Pultec style EQ or something which has got a really wide bandwidth in the top end and a really smooth sounding top end. So we're going to crank the high boost all the way up. We're going to crank the high bandwidth all the way up, and we're going to set it to somewhere around about 12K. Let's take a listen to what this is doing. Like I said, this is going to sound horrible on its own, but when we blend it back in with the original vocal, that's when it's going to add so much clarity and brightness and just goodness to this vocal.
What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late?
One thing to note on this EQ is to set the phase to linear. If you're a Logic user and you're using the Tube EQ and you're using it in parallel, make sure you set it to linear because to just make sure that it stays locked in fades. You don't get any weird phasing issues. I'm also dipping out all of these mid frequencies here and adding this low attenuation to thin the vocal out, so we're really just getting that top end. But to me, it still doesn't sound bright enough and it still doesn't sound airy enough. So what I'm going to do is insert an instance of the exciter. You could just use another EQ after this and boost it even further, but because we've got an exciter in Logic, I'm going to use it. But if you're working in another DAW and you don't have an exciter, just use like another EQ. Just go crazy, boost it loads. You really want this breathy, open quality to it. So we're going to set the exciter frequency to 10K. We've got it set on color 2. We've got about 60% additional harmonics. Let's take a listen to what this sounds like.
What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late? Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back home.
So what we're listening for here is that airy quality to sound smooth, to sound really open. Again, we are just listening to this Bright Vox bus, so the whole thing sounds a bit gross. But what I'm trying to do is engineer something that really accentuates that breathiness and those airy vocal notes. And I feel like this is doing exactly that. So now we've got that, what we're going to do is smash it and destroy it. We're going to use another instance of compression. Again, 1176, this time the vintage FET, which is faster and more characterful than the studio FET, to my ears at least. We're going to set it to 8:1 ratio, so it's quite strong. Super fast release, pretty much as fast as we can go with the attack, but just letting a little bit through still. And then we're just going to smash this. Let's take a listen to what it sounds like.
What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late? Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back home.
So I've got the attack set to a point where it's just letting some of that diction through and those kind of T's and C's, and that just allows a bit more clarity when we blend it back in with the lead vocal. I'm also going to add in this distortion circuit here and set this to soft. It usually sounds quite cool.
What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along.
Yeah, great. It sounds horrible, but it's going to sound great. The other thing to do quickly is just to send this to the mix bus. I realize this is just sent to the stereo output, so we're going to send it to the mix bus. And then what we're going to do is turn that down. We're going to unsolo it. We're going to listen to the vocal in the context of the track, and then we're going to blend this Bright Vox fader back in until we get it to the sweet spot where we're accentuating that breath and bringing her vocal forward.
What if after all this time I was wrong? running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late? Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back home. I'm such a mess, diving so deep into nowhere. I'm so breathless.
Yeah, great. That sounds so good. It really opens the vocal up. It pushes that breathiness forward and it gives the vocal this clarity, which to my ears is super pleasing. It may be too much for you. You might say, I don't think it sounds better, darker, and that's totally fine if that's what you're going for. But for me, I really like that airiness and I think it sounds really good. What we do have now is a vocal which is way too loud. So what we're going to do is create a track for this bus. We're going to bring it here. And then I'm going to actually send both of these to another bus, or in this case, a summing stack in Logic. I'm going to call this lead vocal bus. And then from here on, everything that we do in terms of level, in terms of automation, in terms of adding effects is going to be from this bus. So in order to get the vocal level right, what I like to do is just bring the fader down, play the track back, and then bring the fader back up and see where it sits. What's often good to do is like close your eyes or turn the screen off or whatever, just to get out of looking at the screen and just feel it. In this case, I'm just going to bring the vocal level up, see where it sits, and see what feels good.
This time I was wrong, running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late? Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back home. I'm such a mess, diving so deep into nowhere.
Cool, that sounds pretty good. I'm not going to spend hours going in and getting that level spot on. But what I would say is a really good tip for this is to initially listen very quietly. So I turn the level down there on my speakers and listen to that super quiet, as monitoring really quietly just to find the level, and then turn it up so that you're really feeling it. And if it feels good at a low level and it feels good loud, then generally you got the vocal in the right place. There's areas where I think it sounds a bit over compressed and a bit like we pushed it too far, but I think it's good to show you that you can push it too far with stock plugins, because often I think people think with stock plugins, oh, you can't push them too far, they just sound crap. But like the Logic stock plugins at least sound really good and you can push them far. And like I say, a lot of this is about taste as well. You might want to dial back the compression. You might not want it to be so compressed. You might not want it to be so bright. You might not want it to be so loud. All of that is completely up to you. The point is this vocal chain allows you to design it in whichever way you want. So if you want it to be less compressed, just use less compression. If you want it to be less bright, turn the bright vox bus down or push it up a bit more. The point is it's all there. It's also easy to use and it's also flexible and it works on basically any kind of mix that you do. You may have noticed as well that when we bring that bright vox bus in, it does bring out a bit of noise in the vocal and some extra stuff that maybe we want to mask a bit. And we can do this with some reverb, but it's also crucial to bear in mind what we said at the top of this video when we started out designing the plan for how we're going to build this vocal sound. I said at the time I wanted to have this very upfront, personal, intimate quality to it. So I don't want to drown it in reverb. I want to make sure that the reverbs are dark, that they're filtered, that they sit behind the vocal. The same goes with the delays and stuff. I want to retain this sense that the vocal is up front. I don't want to push it back into the mix. So we can do that by creating separation between the vocal and the reverbs. I'm not going to go totally into like reverbs and delays on this video because otherwise, again, the video is going to be really long. I will do a separate video on how to process your effects properly to get them to enhance the emotion of the vocal and so on and so forth. But for now, I'm going to bring up a long kind of vocal hall reverb. Let's go to this bus 20 here. I have this preset which I made, which is literally just an instance of Space Designer. Let's just play this back in the track and bring this reverb up and see where it sounds good.
What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late? Staring trying to find a way back home. I'm such a mess.
Great. So again, it's really important to listen in the context of the mix, particularly when you're dialing in like your reverb length and the reverb amount, because if you're listening in solo, it's not really going to move with the rest of the track because you have no feeling for how the rest of the track sounds. I always make sure that I'm dialing this stuff in the context of the mix because it allows you to set the reverb time to a point where it feels like it's rhythmic and it's moving with the rest of the track and it's filling these gaps, for example. And it's also really important to be listening to the level of the reverb to make sure you're not drowning the rest of the track or drowning the vocal. So we have the vocal reverb. Like I said, this is all coming off this main vocal bus. And then I like to add in a delay just to give the vocal a bit more interest and add a bit more spaciness. So we're going to bring up another bus that I've already got set. This is the Vibey delay preset, which is from my Ultimate Pop Vocals pack. And really basically what this is an instance of the tape delay going into a reverb to smear it and then going into a chorus to smear it even more. And what that does is give you this kind of washy filtered delay sound that sits behind the vocal, and it allows you to maintain that vocal being up front without being drowned in the delay. So let's take a listen to what this sounds like.
What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late? Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back home. I'm such a mess, diving so deep into nowhere.
One final thing we can add to this chain if we want to just make the vocal sound bigger and jump out of the speakers a bit more is just to add some widening to this vocal in a very subtle way. Again, I've got another preset from my Ultimate Pop Vocals pack, and this is just a instance of the sample delay with a slight delay to the left and then just a slightly longer delay to the right, and a bit of a boost in the top end on the sides only, which just gives it the illusion that the mix is a bit wider, that the vocal's a bit wider.
What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. What if when I turn my back it is too late? Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back home. I'm such a mess.
Cool. Now the amount of that really depends on the vibe that you're going for in your track. If you push that and crank it, you're going to get that sort of wide chorusy sound. If you just add a little bit of it in, it's going to give a bit more dimension and a bit more thickness to the vocal. I don't want too much of it. I don't want it to be this audible, widening double sound. I just want a bit of extra width and thickness to the vocal, and that's giving the vocal a bit of extra dimension and depth. What I might suggest is that for things like this part here, where we're getting this noise coming in on this lead vocal,
Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find.
just in that gap, if you don't want to edit that out, because I think if you edited that, it would sound weird, you could just automate this bright vocal bus down for that phrase, and that should get rid of some of that noise in a more natural sounding way. Make sure that you just add like a ramp back up and see how that sounds.
Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way.
That was not what we intended to do.
Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back. Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way. Staring at these bridges for too long, trying to find a way back home.
Yeah, that sounds much more natural, and it's a good way of like just fine-tuning that bright vocal so that if you're getting noise, you're getting issues, that's the way to do it, is just go in and automate that and just tidy it up. I've also just realized that I've not sent these effect sends to the mix bus, so let's just send them to the mix bus and double check that that still sounds how we want it to sound. And then what we'll do is A/B this with the dry vocal and take a listen to the before and after. Okay, cool. Now let's take a listen to the before and after. We'll A/B the processed vocal with this vocal chain and these vocal effects with the original dry vocal, and we'll see what difference we've made.
What if after all this time I was wrong? Running like a renegade all along. trying to find a way back home. I'm such a mess, diving so deep into nowhere. I'm so breathless, I'm a stray soul lost in the night.
You can hear what a difference that's made. We've totally transformed the sound of that vocal from this dry, unprocessed vocal to this vocal which sits in the track where it should, which honors the plan that we set out with in the first place. And it's all just using this very simple vocal chain, which is totally repeatable. I encourage you to steal this chain. Like I say, this is just stock plugins. We're not using anything fancy. It's super easy to repeat, and you can just save this in your template and do it time and time again, whether you're a Logic Pro user or not. You can basically do this in any DAW using any kind of plugins. So if we're going to recap on the 3 things from this video to take away, it's firstly, set out with a plan. Make sure that you know what you want to achieve before you even begin mixing. And it's going to make your job so much easier. And it's going to allow you to make sure that you transmit the message and the emotion of the song and the vocal performance. Don't sweat too much over the technical stuff. Like I said earlier, the artifacts in the vocals, things like that, they're going to happen. You're going to have it. It's not a big deal so long as you're creating something which really transmits the emotion of the vocal. So have a plan and make sure that you're transmitting the emotion of the vocal. Secondly, is just respond to what you're hearing all the time. Use your ears, trust your instincts. The great thing about this vocal chain is that it's so flexible and it gives you all the tools to be able to respond to those things when you're hearing them. You don't need much else. And lastly, just don't be afraid to push things too far. Push it far, bring it back, and find the sweet spot. Don't always think, oh, I just add a little bit in here, be subtle here, be subtle here. Go too far, push it too far. And I promise you'll get much better results. So if you like this video, you like this vocal chain, just steal it. Just copy what I've done in this video, save it in your template and use it time and time again. And I promise you, it'll just give you results. There's rarely occasions where it doesn't work, regardless of the genre, whether you're working in pop, hip hop, rock music, indie rock, it doesn't matter what you're making. The vocal chain pretty much always works. So copy it, steal it, use it in your tracks. I promise you, you'll get results. And then I will be doing a follow-up video going into vocal effects and kind of going in a bit more detail on how I build those vocal effects and the reverbs and the delays and those kind of decisions I make. So if you want to see more of that, stick around, make sure you hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you soon.